Hello and welcome to Reread. Today I'm filming the last video of the year, just a bit of a yearly recap. I'm going to give some basic stats talking about how many books I read this year, what some of the highlights were, and books that kind of fall into some categories. I already talked in my bookshelf tour video, the last one. I went over these books, which are more or less my TBR for next year. I don't know if I'll get through all of them, but some of the core authors and the goals that I have for next year, I already talked about in that video. So this year this video rather is going to be mostly just a recap, talking about some of my favorite unique reads, etc. And maybe I'll have some plans for things that I want to read this year. Anyway, I'm going to go over some basic stats. There should be timestamps throughout the video, or like chapter marks, if you want to skip to specific book or books that fall into the certain categories. Anyway, basic stats, just taking a look. I read 58 books this year, and it was 19,505 pages, which slightly exceeded my 18,250 page goal, or 50 pages a day. This was quite a lot for me, but also because I did spend quite a bit of time this year on vacation, actually where I started this channel. So I did have quite a bit of time to read and get through some of the bigger books. That was one of the reasons I changed to a pages goal. Was because last year I had a goal of reading 52 books, which I did exceed as well, but I ended up finding, as I was getting to the end of the year, I wasn't really that content, because I would always look at a big book that I wanted to read and notice that I wasn't going to read it within a week, and I would be less inclined to start it. So this year instead, I opted for a pages goal, hoping that would help. To some degree it helped, but in another degrees it didn't. Mainly just because, some books, yes, a book could be longer, but also what about difficulty? If I'm reading Infinite Jest, I'm capping at 15 pages an hour, whereas if I'm burning my way through a Brandon Sanderson novel, I'm hitting 40s and 50s per hour. So in that degree, I felt sometimes that I was choosing easier novels, ones that I was able to get through. But yeah, next year I'm going to try and not have a quantitative goal. I just want to keep reading as much as I'm reading, as much as is feasible, and just try to continue getting through as many books as I can. Just keep reading as much as possible. Anyway, moving on to some of the categories I couldn't really narrow it down to think of like a favorite book of the year, but I do have some, I guess, traditional categories in this year. So I'm going to go over, my first category is surprisingly good reads, and I've chosen two. The first is Vladimir Nabokov's Speak Memory, his autobiography from the kind of first half of his life, I guess, which is just a superb book. I don't think I'll ever read an autobiography that is as good as this. I mean, maybe, people have been talking a lot about Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle, but in such a small volume, Nabokov has such an incredible memory, even though it's very likely that some things are fabricated, just through the nature of the way that he writes. He has this excellent, we all know how great Nabokov's prose is, and he translates that perfectly to his autobiography. I just want to read a short section from maybe even the first paragraph from chapter 1. The cradle rocks above an abyss, and a common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. Although the two are identical twins, man, as a rule, views the prenatal abyss with more calm than the one he is heading for at some 4,500 heartbeats an hour. I know, however, of a young chronophobiac who experienced something like panic when looking for the first time at homemade movies that had been taken a few weeks before his birth. He saw a world that was practically unchanged, the same house, the same people, and then realized that he did not exist there at all and that nobody mourned his absence. He caught a glimpse of his mother waving from an upstairs window, and that unfamiliar gesture disturbed him as if it was some mysterious farewell. But what particularly frightened him was the sight of a brand new baby carriage standing there on the porch with a smug, encroaching air of a coffin. Even that was empty, as if, in the reverse course of events, his very bones had disintegrated. Such fancies are not foreign to young lives, or to put it otherwise, first and last things often tend to have an adolescent note, unless, possibly, they are directed by some venerable and rigid religion. Nature expects a full-grown man to accept the two black voids, fore and aft, as stolidly as he accepts the extraordinary visions in between. Imagination, the supreme delight of the immortal and the immature, should be limited. In order to enjoy life, we should not enjoy it too much. I rebel against this state of affairs. I feel the urge to take my rebellion outside and pick at nature. Over and over again, my mind has made colossal efforts to distinguish the faintest of personal glimmers in the impersonal darkness on both sides of my life. That this darkness is caused merely by the walls of time separating me and my bruised fists from the free world of timelessness is a belief I gladly share with the most gaudily painted savage. I've journeyed back in thought, with thought hopelessly tapering off as I went, to remote regions where I groped for some secret outlet, only to discover that the prison of time is spherical and without exits. Short of suicide, I have tried everything. Man, I cannot recommend Nabokov's autobiography enough. I think it is just absolutely stunning. And I'm noticing that it is getting dark because I am filming this later. I'm not going to be reading extracts from everything, trust me. I just had to read that start of Nabokov because I didn't make a video on it. The second most surprising read was Moby Dick. I had no idea this book was this good. I've already made a video about it, talking about how much I love it. But yeah, Moby Dick is my number 2 for most surprising reads. The next category is, I believe, books I will reread in 2023. I'm not a big rereader yet, even though I have so many books. Like every 5-star book I say is something that I want to and have to go back and reread. But alas, I never get around to do it. I keep choosing new books. But 2 books that I know for sure I'm going to be rereading are The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon and Jorge Luis Borges' Fictions. These 2 were immensely impactful, and I also chose them because of how short they are. I will certainly be rereading these in 2023. Next category, favorite reading accomplishments. So I did read quite a lot of books this year, and one of my big accomplishments was, like I said, in talking about choosing pages instead of book counts. One of my big accomplishments was that I finally got around to reading some big books, and the 3 big ones are really the kind of holy trinity of smugness: Gravity's Rainbow, Ulysses, and Infinite Jest. I read all 3 of these in 1 year, and I read Ulysses in the 100th anniversary. This was published in February of 2022. All of these were incredible 5-star reads, and I have just had an absolute ball, an absolute whale of a time reading these. Moving on, this is a bit of a funny category. The only book I did not finish this year, the only book I started but didn't finish, was the King James Holy Bible. I read Genesis and Exodus, and I enjoyed it, but the Bible was just so big, and I kind of... The idea of trying to convince myself to finish it in the year was a bit too dread-inducing. I'm going to set some kind of... I'm going to try and just slowly chip away at it. I'm pretty infamously a monogamous reader. I really try to not read multiple books at a time, but I know I'm just going to have to take a book of the Bible and read, or maybe like 2 or 3 books of the Bible, read those, and then read another book, come back to this book if I'm ever going to get through it. Anyway, yeah, that's the only book I started but didn't finish this year. So, favorite new author that I read. This was really hard to decide, but if I'm going to have to just choose one, because of how he influenced my non-fiction writing, I'm going to have to give it to David Foster Wallace. With his essays, and Infinite Jest kind of just being an incredible book. However, if I can choose to split it into fiction and non-fiction, I will give it to Thomas Pynchon for fiction. There's Crying of Lot 49 over there as well, and David Foster Wallace for non-fiction. Wallace's essays were just a revelation to me, and I really love, I kind of already loved writing nonfiction, but seeing the format and the model, more than the format and structure of Infinite Jest being inspiring, I really loved how he writes essays, and I thought that could just be such a great model that I could adopt for my own writing. I'm gonna do a quick little test to see if this light looks too ghastly. Let's see. What am I gonna do? You know, tip that down a bit. That's not bad. All right, yeah. So here we go. Let there be light. I just had to test if that lamp looked too bad. But yeah, it's just getting dark, so we've been enlightened. Next category is books I didn't get around to reading. I've had these books for the whole year. I knew I really wanted to get around to it, but I just never found the right vibe or the right time, the right mood. The first was Pride and Prejudice. At this point, I think I own almost every Austen book, like I said, but I just didn't get around to reading Pride and Prejudice. I really, really wish I was disciplined and read one of Braxton's Triaxiom writings. This is one of those books that I knew was going to be important, as Anthony Braxton is one of my favorite people who's ever lived, much less author, a musician, but yeah, I just never really found the exact right moment. And another music book that I unfortunately didn't get around to was Ben Johnston's Maximum Clarity. He's a very important microtonal composer, and being somewhat of a microtonal composer myself, I thought I should get around to it, but yeah, unfortunately just never lined up. On the inverse, actually, a book that I am surprised that I actually read is Paradise Lost. This book has been sitting on my bookshelf maybe about as long as Ulysses has, and I just didn't think I was ever going to get around to reading it. But alas, yeah, Paradise Lost managed to smash through that this year. Okay, yeah. So the most unique books that I read this year, I've chosen 3. The first is Corbo Abe's The Boxman. Made a video on this, so if you want some thoughts, you're welcome to go check it out. Also, The Siberiad. I didn't want all of my unique books to be kind of eerie, and the next one is as well. The Siberiad was just such a pleasure. It was such a delight to read. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed it. And also, I did read the collected short fictions of Kafka, but for the most unique story, I actually wanted to choose The Burrow. It was like Kafka was asked to write what going down a rabbit hole felt like, and it is just this insane experience. I highly recommend, firstly, I highly recommend reading all of the short stories of Kafka, but The Burrow is the most unique one. Of course, Kafka has really great stories like In the Penal Colony, The Country Doctor, etc. But yeah, The Burrow was the one that stood out in my memory. The Hunger Artist is also very, very good. But yeah, I could just go on talking about Kafka for ages, so I'm going to move on. I don't have too many other categories. So the best short story collection, I've already talked about it. It is Fictions by Borges, but my favorite single short story is from the Siberiad, and it is How the World Was Saved. I read an introduction from it. I read from the introduction in my video on the Siberiad and Solaris, which if you're curious, you're welcome to go and check out. But I just read it. I had the biggest smile on my face after I read the first sentence, and I knew that this was going to be just an outstanding book. So yeah, those are my 2 things. The best essay I read this year comes from Wallace, and it is in Consider the Lobster. It is Authority and American Usage. The premise was that Wallace was asked to write a review on a dictionary of modern American usage, and he goes down this entire incredible rabbit hole talking about the different prescriptive versus descriptive, prescriptive versus descriptive approaches to lexicography. Is that the study of creating dictionaries? Just a really insane essay. Maybe another contender or a runner-up would be E Unibus Plurum, but yeah, Authority and American Usage was the one that stood out to me as just the most insane, and I really, really loved it. My best book purchase I am going to give to Finnegan's Wake, which I bought for €2 outside Humboldt University in Berlin. I was just moseying down the street looking. I saw some people were selling books, and I was just skimming through the boxes. All books were like for €2, and most of the books were in German, and I can't really read German, so I was just like skimming through. I was like, maybe I'll find something cool, and I saw this edition of Finnegan's Wake, and I bought it instantly, and I just laughed. I thought it was so funny. I imagined some poor German bastard bought this book and thought, yeah, this will be a book that's in English, and he didn't realize it's in every language that ever exists. But best deal. And also a funny story by Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce in Berlin. Lucky last, I thought I would just talk about favorite literature related people, which, to be honest, I kind of just made this category to talk about how much I love Michael Silverblatt, because finding out about that guy and, obviously his interviews with Wallace are great, but I actually was listening to him with talking to John Barth and William Gass and other things, and things like with Silverblatt talking about second order illiteracy. Those were just some things that absolutely blew my mind. And I know he didn't come up with it, but him mentioning it and just talking about his enthusiasm for books, I adored it. I love Michael Silverblatt. I'm just gonna say it. But I'll also just mention some YouTubers. Even though I don't think I found out about him this year. Of course, Leaf by Leaf is such a great figure in the community. There's also the Books of Some Substance podcast and YouTube channel, and another channel, The Day of Small Things. All of these are great, and I just really love watching their videos, seeing their work, following them on their relevant social medias, etc. Books of Some Substance has a kind of Instagram account where they're using AI to generate images of quotes from In Search of Lost Time. It's called In Search of Lost Context, and it's just incredible. I recommend you check it out. I also wanted to give a thanks to Desi, for who I met in Berlin, who's been it's been great to keep in touch with you and talk about books. So yeah, thanks, and thanks to all the, I guess, 100-ish people who have subscribed. I started this channel this year, and it was such a great, I'm so glad that I finally did it. I've been reading for a while, but I wanted to just get around to finally starting to talk about my books. I hope everybody has a great new year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll definitely be back next year talking about the books I'm reading in 2023. Thank you for watching.